Better. All right, so we'll begin. If the way I like to do is because we have some new people, we'll go around the table, just share everyone's names. And then if there's a question that's already on your mind, he's got a really tough one for me that I don't have a good answer for, but we'll put it up to the table anyways. I think it's still a good one to start with. But we'll start with Shelley. How about that?
Michelle Wolf, Rita,
Stan Stoller.
Donna Stoller, Lamb,
Jeffrey Kuzmitsky.
Rabbi Levi.
All right. So now that we know each other's names, you could name call when you don't like what someone said. But we'll start. Do you want to start with your question? Okay.
With all the advances in electronics, why couldn't someone who wanted to record a bar mitzvah, because there was family not here or ill, they couldn't come, set up the electronic recording before Shabbos and turn it on so you're not turning everything on Shabbos. And after Shabbos is over, turn it off, and then at some later point they can cut out the parts that don't involve the bar mitzvah, and the family can have
Some memento of the
bar mitzvah. We do it with lights in the house. We do it with food. Why couldn't we do it with a bar mitzvah?
So just to add some details, and then I'm going to let people give their own answers on this, and then I'll chime in a bit. But when you talk about Shabbat observance, and we say, okay, you don't do active electronics, but we see, like you mentioned, that there are lights that go on timers. You could have your oven turn off on a timer. You can't necessarily turn on an oven on Shabbos like that, but we do a lot of things on timers. So why can't I just set up a camera? It starts way before Shabbos. And in the olden day, you have to change. When I say olden day, not too long ago, you changed the tape. But now the hardware can actually take hours and hours of video. So why can't you just turn on a camera, have it on until after Shabbos? And then after Shabbos, you'll cut whatever you need, keep it for a memento's sake for the family or whatever reason of a bar mitzvah is the example given here. And so that's the full stop of the question, right? Appreciating the fact that we're talking about somebody who observes Shabbat and won't do an active electronic on Shabbos. Here it's passive. So what would be the problem? Is there a problem, etc.? So any thoughts on this? I want to go for it.
Like, well, what if I turn the TV on or Shabbos, and then it's on, and then the idea was also, what's the point of Shabbos, right? So let's try to find these ways to do what we generally do on that day that doesn't really break the law, but is really sliding into the point. That connection with Hashem, that leaving behind the mundane world and having these 25 hours of observance and connection. So there's the intent as well. Honoring the Sabbath that much safe in with. So now, obviously, with this, the bar mitzvah is not something so mundane, but I think there's draw a guard around the Torah. Like if we start
the fence, the famous fence.
One little thing, then why just do other little thing? Then it seems to fit you, and then we start breaking Shabbat apart.
We have an arrow that allows you to do things within that.
Hold on, I'll touch the Eruv next. It's different actually, but I'll touch it next. Meaning that wouldn't be a good example for it. I'll explain that one next. But go for it.
I think if we used to have a Shabbos goy, we couldn't have this. In my mind, I don't think it impinges on Shabbat at all.
Okay, so I'll answer that one too in a minute. Okay, so Shabbos goy and Eruv. No, because I'll tell you why. Some of the things that we think these types of concepts, like the Shabbos goy, a non-Jewish person who's doing things for a Jewish family on Shabbat, or an eruv, are actually, there's a little bit of misconception on it. I'll clarify what it is and what it isn't. And some people have never really understood it, even living with a community, and they use that individual to help them, and they've been doing it wrong because they never really understood the concept as well. Very complex concept, actually, the Shabbos goy.
It also, my understanding, that the presence of family, parents, grandparents is certainly part of observing Shabbat. That's part of it. If I have relatives out of the state,
You can't make
cannot
it.
get because of health reasons, doing this allows them to participate in the bar mitzvah. Me, that's honoring the Sabbath. And if you can do that, like, if that's part of Shabbat, having family and people together to celebrate the important occasion, why can't you record it in order to fulfill the mitzvah of observing the Shabbat for a bar mitzvah?
Well, there's two things. Number one, recording so that they can use the electronics after the bar mitzvah. And the other thing is having it just on for them to participate in, because then they're using the electronics.
Like if you zoomed it,
Pardon me?
like if you zoomed it, you put Zoom on and then they can just drop by and watch it, then they're actively participating in using the.
I think there's two things. I mean,
Yeah, that's on like.
Yeah.
I'm writing notes so I can get back to each point. All right, you want to add something to that, or someone raised their hand over here? No. Okay. You want to add something?
How do you interpret using this? There's a camera in here. If they were recording a bar mitzvah, the camera would be larger. Nevertheless, how do you interpret this as work?
It's using electronics.
Yeah, but it's.
These are good questions, by the way.
It's not the same thing. No one is working. Because the light goes on, shouldn't matter. I don't know why that matters.
So I think it's worth a reframe for just a moment, a Shabbos kind of 101 quickly, and then maybe to address the question specifically. So number one is that the first thing that Mona actually added, which is correct, which I had shared with Jeffrey, but I don't know that he likes the answer. And I always appreciate, by the way, that I could share something and you don't appreciate it the same way I do, and I totally respect that. So it's not a problem. There is something that Mona touched, which I use different words, but the exact same thing, which is the spirit of Shabbat. So to really summarize everything she had mentioned is that there are certain things there is the law, the letter of the law, and then there is the spirit of the law. And so if Shabbat is a day of rest, and I'm going to talk about rest in a second because that's what you touched, then what defines rest? And so the participation of a Shabbat and the way we participate in Shabbat, not just that it happens, is that we really divest ourselves from everything that goes on during the week. That's business. It includes, for many people, even reading the newspaper. I'm just using that as an example, because that brings about a mindset of work and business and things that aren't in the spirit. Is it wrong? Is it a Jewish law that says you can't read the newspaper? That's not what I'm getting at. My point is to talk about the spirit of the law. It's a day that you devote yourself to God, to the Torah, to study, but also to enjoying the day. And that's where the question comes. Well, I enjoy running. I enjoy the gym. Why is that not allowed? So I understand where these questions come from. So just to touch some of the things. Family, you had mentioned about family. Who decided how a bar mitzvah should look? That family have to be there. Bar mitzvah means a person turned the age of mitzvah. We as a community, we make a big deal out of it, but that's not what the Torah says to do. We make a big deal because we want this person to know that this is a beautiful rite of passage. Community is celebrating this person, hopefully to give them a little bit of oomph, if you want to call it that, a little bit of a boost, that now they have real responsibilities in Judaism, and we want them to know we're there with them. We're celebrating that. And maybe there will be times in the future that will be more difficult or challenges, and they know that there's a community that's rallying with them. So the family aspect is not necessarily part of the bar mitzvah. But I do want to add something. I think this question really came up during COVID more than anything, and had nothing to do with bar mitzvahs, and probably a better argument, which was you had people who were not able to go to shul because they were more likely that if they would have COVID, they would have tremendous health issues and possibly death. And so we told them, don't go to shul. And they're like, what do you mean? My whole life is shul, community. How do you tell me to not show up? So what can you do to make me feel part of the community? Zoom came this big aspect. And then you said, but wait a second, the Orthodox, and I don't want to use that word, but people who are following the traditional understanding of the Torah, who weren't using electronics, said, we're sorry, we can't turn on a Zoom, we can't turn on a camera for our shul because it's against the law. And then you say, but wait a second, why not turn it on earlier? And people who are using the microphones of the Zoom cameras are not doing it specifically to touch a microphone. It's happening on its own. Is that a problem? And that's where these questions really came up. And the last answer is sometimes not participating in a mitzvah is exactly what God wants you to do in that moment. So yes, community is very important. Let's find other avenues that maybe change the whole Jewish landscape in a good way. That said, we've always defined Judaism and Jewish activity and Jewish community by coming to shul on Saturday or Friday night. Well, maybe we need to reframe that and say that's not what community looks like. Community is every day of the week, and we have to strengthen other days. And this day is going to look different because the same God that wants me to daven with a minyan doesn't want that person to be in shul at minyan because it's not healthy. It's dangerous. And life is the most important thing. So part of this question requires a reframe, but I will touch cameras for a second. After Jeffrey asked me this last week, I quickly Googled to see the answers. I had already shared the spirit of Shabbos thing. I looked, olden day cameras was a different, I would say, issue, and possibly it's still an issue, but not the same. The olden day camera required writing. The actual instrument of the camera was writing onto a film. The new way is writing, but it's kind of different when we talk about data. But if we talk about writing as a whole, writing is one of the prohibitions of Shabbat. This comes back to your question that you kind of brought up. The Torah gives 39 categories of labor that are forbidden on Shabbat. And so for us, we could look at them and say, well, one of those things looks very simple. It's not labor. I don't schwitz from it. But Shabbat labor has nothing to do with schwitzing. It has nothing to do with sweating and working too hard. Because remember, someone could walk to shul 5 miles and he's doing a mitzvah. And the next person says, well, I run 5 miles every day. And we say, oh, that's not something you should do on Shabbos. They both did the same thing. One had the purpose of going to daven at shul, and the other person had the interest of exercise, fitness, and things that we say, well, you should stay away from that on Shabbos. So the idea of labor, when we talk about it for Shabbos, is best, I think, defined by 2 words. In the Torah, you find 2, or I should say in Hebrew, you find 2 different words for work. The first word is avoda. The word that they use for Shabbos, though, in the Torah is malacha. They both translate to work. What's the difference between the 2 of them? So malacha that we talk about for Shabbos has to do with things that require more thought. Not me thinking, but they are more intellectual activities. And so anything that requires me to do a little bit more, required a little bit more into the instrument of it, in the way it was created or the way it works, would be a prohibition within the malacha. Now, within the categories of malacha, the question is, does a camera even fit into one of those 39? So turning it on Shabbos, we could say is, but then you come back to the question, well, let's turn it on before. And that will come back to a couple of things, like what is, like we kind of mentioned. Number one is, what's the spirit of the Shabbos? And again, I still understand why someone will still challenge these questions. Say, well, why is the camera itself the issue? But then Mona added another thing. It's like, what does it lead to? And the rabbis definitely cared about that aspect. Because again, from the Torah itself, this might not fit into a biblical prohibition if we start analyzing how electronics work it's all passive. Passive electronics goes on the rabbis. Active electronics will go from the Torah. Like, for example, if I walk and touch a button, that's active. If I walk into an area and then passively that same activity will happen, that's going to be rabbinic. Why did the rabbis institute a law on something that I cause, which is called grama? I didn't actively touch it, but my action caused it. They were afraid that somebody would come to actively do it. And so if I use that line of thought for a moment, you and I might totally understand the situation and say, you know what, record it. Start before Shabbos. We figured it all out. Someone else might not see it the same way and might not realize that we work within a framework that would allow it. And so we're always afraid of what someone else will do because of it. Same thing with kosher food. We talk about that. We talk about this in many aspects of Judaism, the perception of what others see and don't know. And that's why I come back to the two things that you both mentioned, the Eruv and the Shabbos Goy. Great examples of people who saw something, didn't necessarily understand it well, and it ended up that they did something incorrectly because of it. So here is one example. I've heard, and maybe this is not what you meant, but I've heard this, that you talk about the Eruv and somebody says, oh yeah, because there's an Eruv, you could drive your car there. Because there's an Eruv, you could turn up. There are people who understand the Eruv is like, oh, everything within that, you can do anything you want. Obviously incorrect. But there are people who come to that conclusion because they said, oh, the Eruv allows you to do, what did it allow people to do? Allowed them to carry in the street. But someone who was less focused on what was going on, all they heard was it allowed. Like, oh, you can do everything on Shabbos within the Eruv. There are a lot of people who have this joke, but it comes from a truth that people misunderstood what it does. What the Eruv does is not a loophole. It is not something that the rabbis invented per se. It's a word that I've shared here because I love it. I learned it from my accountant, that it is not a tax loophole, it's a tax exception. If we say it's a loophole, we're cheating. If we say it's an exception, it does not connote cheating. It says that we're working within the framework of the law and allowing something because the law didn't prohibit it. And so the error of what it was you're not allowed to carry in a public domain. But for the laws of Shabbos, and I should say in Jewish law in general, there are 4 domains. Private domain, public domain, and then there is what we call a carmelis, which is kind of like a rabbinic domain. And it's not public, it's really private, but the rabbi said we can't call it private. It's a little bit, it's a little bit similar to a public domain, and we're afraid of how people look at that. And so when you create an Eruv which says, I am using a private domain, which the Torah already allowed you to carry in, the rabbi said you can't carry in a carmelis. I'm using the word that's used in Jewish law. What happens if I make that more perfect? What happens if I join it? I enclose that area. Then the rabbi said in that area you can carry, because really it's a private domain. You can never make an Eruv in a true public domain. What defines a public domain? This is the greatest question. What defines a true public domain? It has to be a domain that was public the same way the Torah calls a public domain. When the Jewish people traveled in the desert, the amount of people that traveled was considered a public area. And so any area that has over 600,000 people travel on a single day becomes a public domain. The 51 freeway, for example, is not a public domain. When you look at the statistics of how many cars and people travel through it on a day-to-day basis, is not 600,000. Go to the I-17 and interstates, the I-10, you're now talking other numbers. And so an Eruv that would be over the 51 could work. An Eruv that would go over the I-10 cannot work, because now we're talking about a biblical public domain. So the Eruv, all it did is it took something that was already really a private domain, but the rabbis were afraid that people would make mistakes about, because it isn't enclosed, whereas a house is enclosed. You have a front yard that has or a backyard that has fencing. And so what they did was they said, this domain really is private. You have to do something to markate it. That's why you can carry there, because the Torah allowed it. But they added on restrictions. So that's an Eruv. It doesn't really allow you to do anything that you couldn't do before. The second thing was not an Eruv, but a Shabbos Goy. That is a First of all, who created the term people? That's not the term that you find in Jewish law, obviously. The real term is telling a non-Jewish person to do something for you on Shabbos. Can you do that according to Jewish law? The answer is no. If I can't do it, they can't do it for me. So they can't do it for me.
Does that mean they can't say Kaddish for you?
Well, hold on. That's a for sure, but I meant doing something that was prohibited to me on Shabbos. The answer for Kaddish is for sure a no. But let's talk about something else. I can't turn on the lights on Shabbos because that is, for whatever reason, that lights are prohibited from turning on. Therefore, I cannot ask them to turn on the light. I'll share a story that I always laugh at. I once visited somebody in the hospital and he tells me the story. He's like, he was walking in Brooklyn on Eastern Parkway and a person comes down the stairs and they say, can you help us in our home? He's like, sure. I'm a nice guy. He goes into the house. He said, can you turn off our oven, turn on the lights here? And then at the end, they say, the reason why we're asking is because we're Jewish and we can't do this on our Sabbath. And he's like, oh, I know, I'm Jewish too. True story. So the point is that you cannot ask a non-Jewish individual who is not obligated in Shabbat to do things for you that you were prohibited of doing as well. So what is the trick to do that when you're in a pickle? That they do it for themselves. And so if you invited them into the home, there's actually another detail to that. If you invited them into your home to turn off or to turn on a light, they have to benefit from that light. That's number one, right? They have to gain benefit from their action. And number two, you cannot actively say, hey, can you turn on the light or can you turn off the light? But you are allowed to hint it.
It's getting really dark in here.
Exactly. Or it is freezing in here. And if they don't catch your hints, you're in trouble. It's like, so why don't you go turn on the light? Right? And so you have a conversation. So in larger communities, there were people who already know this, non-Jewish individuals, and they make a business out of it. They charge, they'll come by your house 4 times on Shabbos, put your flag out if you need us, and they already know the hints. There's businesses out there. There was an article, I think 2 years ago that talked about this. Maybe it was Baltimore or somewhere. And the business was going so well, he hired people to work with him. Right? $25 a Shabbos. I come by your house 4 times and you'll hint what you need. But that's the idea. In telling a non-Jew to do it, you cannot tell him to do it. You can hint. Maybe I have to just review this quickly, but maybe the hinting is that we don't want you to be able to tell him actively because that would be a problem from the rabbis, right? That could be an additional rabbinic. I'm just sharing how it is.
So you're paying someone to work on Shabbos. Seems that's not.
By the way, that's a good extra detail to this question, right? If I am paying the person, can I pay somebody to come to my house to clean? Yes. Because they're doing things that I can do myself, so they're allowed on Shabbos. Can you pay them on Shabbos? For sure not. These are good questions. They're all addressed, each one's kind of differently, but you definitely can't pay them to do something you can't do. So I might be paying them for, thank you for stopping by. I'm going to give you a little gift every time. I mean, you have good questions, right? Do you phrase it that you're paying them for the service, or do you pay them for, hey, checking in on me? I appreciate it. And while he's there, he's doing stuff that he benefits from. These are good questions. I would have to go into like more study on exactly how the payment works. But I'll give you a better example, which does come up often. You're traveling, you go to Israel, you go to Venice, and you're going to a restaurant for Shabbos that is open on Shabbos. And again, they're only doing things that are allowed on Shabbos. So the food was warmed, it wasn't cooked for you on the spot, and you're paying them for what you bought. How does that work? Or like I was in camp, there was a canteen, and they would write down, not by pen, they had like a paper that had tabs. So my number, let's say Levi Levertov is number 300 in the book. They go to page 300 and they use a tab every time if I took a soda or I took a Laffy Taffy or a chocolate bar, they take the tab and just flip it over or fold it on that item. And after Shabbos, they're going to charge me. There are questions about this for real. It's not as simple as we make it. We sometimes know that the outcome is you can do it this way, but we didn't study how we got to that. And that's kind of what's coming up here. And that's really what your question is. Okay, you're not supposed to do it, but why? Let's bring it to there. So, like I mentioned, there's going to be a couple of things. I will add one thing to what your point is. For security, you're going to have different answers. So I remember a rabbi in Pittsburgh, there was some sort of a crime outside of their synagogue. The police come and say, oh, you have great cameras here. Can we have your footage? And he's like, I'll tell you the truth. I shut it off for Shabbat. And so ever since then, he keeps it on for Shabbos. Now the question is, can I review the cameras randomly? Just because I want to see what's going on. Should that camera footage get out if I saw something really cute? Can I publicize it? I get flack, I will tell you, I get flack. I put up pictures of our Friday night dinners, for example, and I say, Shabbat dinner, and people are like, well, how do you take pictures on Shabbos? And all the pictures were taken before. And so sometimes I'll put a little footnote, photos before Shabbat. And people have called, it's like, how could you take those? They weren't taken on Shabbos, but even the notion that I might have gets people nervous because what do other people see when they see pictures were taken? You're publicizing it. So when we have a photographer, we always tell them, we don't want any pictures after I hold the cup. That's what I tell them. Like the minute I hold that cup, I don't want any more pictures because then I've taken on Shabbos. Right? Kiddush is the act of taking on Shabbat. That we're after Kiddush. Right. I don't control yeah, no, and I will share, like, I don't control if somebody pulls out their phone at the table. I'm not walking around saying, hey, please put that away. Those are usually not I'm not publicizing that, but that could happen anywhere. I've seen pictures of me doing Toshla, I'm saying like, you don't control other people. I can control my arm. And wait, hold on. It comes from me that it was after Shabbos. Yeah, but that wouldn't be me posting it. That's what I mean. It wouldn't be my pictures or me. Yeah, no, I know all about these. I watch people take pictures of the birthdays and this. I don't control other people, right? I can control me. And then over time you learn. Or you learn sensitivity, where it's like, okay, I know that you don't do that, but I understand that you wouldn't want me to publicize that one, kind of like that. That's kind of I learned this story a long time ago that I always loved. My dad, on his first year living downtown, he went to someone's house after the Seder. So he finished his Seder. There was a Jewish person on the block, so he goes and visits them, or maybe it was a couple blocks away, and they offered him a beer. Right? They just did a Seder, and they offered him a beer. Beer is not kosher for Passover. It's made from wheat, and it's fermented. And so he just politely refused. He didn't tell them it's wrong to have beer on Passover. The next year, that family came and took one of the classes for Passover, and they found out that beer is not kosher for Passover. And the light bulb turned on. It's like, oh my gosh, we offered the rabbi beer. And they were so grateful that he didn't call them out on it, right? They learned it with the calm and beauty of it rather than the admonishing. And so it's through the love, not through I don't want to say hate, but it wasn't the other way. And so that had a tremendous effect on them, that my dad and them are very close till today. And so that, I think it comes back to a couple of things, but it didn't answer necessarily the technical aspect of why. Whether it's the spirit of Shabbat, that's the issue, whether it's an actual prohibition because of a law of writing or something else, or just to throw something out there, which is very interesting. With bike riding and musical instruments, there's a totally different reason why we don't do them on Shabbos. And that is we're afraid you will come to repair it. Which repairing would totally be an issue on Shabbat. So if I go bike riding and my wheel or my chain breaks, I need to fix that. Or I likely will fix that. And so now I'm heading into a territory of a real prohibition. And so that comes back to like what you said, the safeguards. The other thing that Mona talked about, the fence. Right? We do have safeguards because the biblical is so important to us and of so much value. We've created those lines in the sand. I'm calling them the sand on purpose because for specific scenarios, we move that line. When they are for life-saving reasons or other things that would, I'm going to use security as the reason. Yes.
I used to go to LA and stay in this one hotel that had a lot of very religious Jews stayed in. And on Shabbat, they would have the desk clerk push the elevator button and unlock their door. So that was something like they're making a loophole for themselves for not following the true essence.
Right. So this is actually very common. You go to a hotel, well, let's say for a bar mitzvah, it's not even for vacation. And the entire hotel is electric. The doors are electronic, the elevator. And here you'll find a lot of different rabbis chime in on this. So some people, is everyone here familiar with the Shabbos elevator? You've heard of it. So a Shabbos elevator is an elevator that's been programmed to stop at every floor. And in a larger building, they might split it. One elevator goes from the middle floors and up, and the other elevator goes from the first floor to the middle. So this way you don't have to, if it's a 20-story building, you don't have to stop 20 times. But the idea of the Shabbos elevator has many rabbis that say you still shouldn't do that because things change when you walk into that elevator, from your weight, from your this, from your that. And there are a lot of settings that might be changed for that. So I'm not saying anything about that. But there's plenty of rabbis that say it's fine within a framework. Why are they creating these ideas? There's an amazing institute in Israel called Somet that does a lot of this innovation. I think the Shabbos elevator is one of theirs. It's a bunch of engineers who work with rabbis to understand how the electronics or the engineering of something works and to make a Shabbos option for it. But even they write, it's not necessarily for everyone. I'm going to give you a great example. There's a scooter, like for somebody who's less mobile, can't get around as far walking. And so they'll use a scooter. That's a normal thing and it's a quality of life thing. Like kind of come back to what you were talking about. And so they created a scooter. A guy or a girl needs to be in shul. Community is part of her life or his life. And now that they can't walk as well, and they live a mile from the synagogue, and they want to be part of it, what do? So maybe someone will push them in a wheelchair. Maybe they're not comfortable with that. Maybe they can't find someone. And also that means you've lost independence. And so this institute has created a scooter that works for Shabbos. Now, I'm healthy, thank God. Can I go use that scooter? Well, the short answer is depends who you ask. Right? But in the bigger picture of it, the idea is they've worked within the law to make a scooter work on Shabbos. So traditionally, we would say that is for people who need that benefit. And therefore, somebody who doesn't, why are you trying to work on the fringes of Jewish law where there's opinions that say maybe you shouldn't do something? So for health, that's going to be a good reason. But somebody who's fully healthy, they shouldn't be joyriding on Shabbos with that. Does that come back to the spirit of the law, or does that come back to something else that says they're using opinions of rabbis that maybe not everyone agrees with? So I'm going to try to follow one path. So what I like to share is this has nothing to do with Shabbos. This has to do everything Jewish. I can always find a rabbi that is going to tell me I can do something, right? It's unfortunate, but not because people are bad rabbis. The best thing is follow one rabbi because that rabbi is going to always have one way of looking at everything. So you're taking one standard, consistent standard. And so if I could totally find the rabbi for this, I call the rabbi for that. I call that rabbi in California for that, the rabbi in Toronto for something else. You can 100% do that. And guess what? You wouldn't be doing anything wrong. But you should have consistency, or the people who see it, your own family, your kids, are going to say, this Judaism is all interpretation. You can do whatever the heck you want. When really, those rabbis have good reasons for their styles of how they reply to things. But they were for you. So you had a relationship. They understood your situation rather than, I could do that. I could do this. I could do that. So I always it's important to have some sort of a consistency, a feel that this is really about a relationship with God. This isn't about the law and the black letters on a white page. In that relationship, there's a framework and a structure. And so it's on us to find the meaning. And if we're looking to find the out of everything, we're clearly not looking for the meaning. And so I come back to your question. There's an emotional part to your question. It's like maybe you had a story like that, or you know how meaningful it is to have this for those family members, or maybe you couldn't be at something and they wouldn't record it for you. The emotional side is not going to be answered by the technical side. The emotional side says that sometimes I need to reframe how I'm thinking. It's like I understand why they're not doing it, because there is a value to this relationship, and it might not always look the way I want it to look. But that blueprint was given by God and said, this is for you, for me to connect with God. And so when you think about Shavuos, which is next week, that was God saying, like, I want to have this connection to you. Here are the ways that we can connect. And so if we want to find all the loopholes and you find that meaningful, that's fine. That's for you to decide. So in some of these things, the answer is yes, I can go find a rabbi that's going to tell me why in this situation it's fine, or do it, but don't tell anyone. I've heard those lines, right? Why not tell anyone? Because we're afraid of how it will be interpreted by others, where the next person's taking their camera out to take pictures. That part. Yeah.
In philosophy and history, there are terms, the universal and the particulars. What's more important here, the universal or the particular? I think I know what your answer is both. I knew you were going to say that, but I think it's the universal concept is more important than whether you use the Shabbos elevator or you turn on the camera or whatever.
Right.
And to us, Shabbos is very, very special. And it means that you do something very different from what you did the rest of the week. Which in our case, some of it might be work, but very, very different from what you did all week. And I want to go a step further, but we've been married coming up 68 years. Thank you. And we look at the anniversary, it's a commemoration. That's all. Every day of those 68 years has been a celebration. And I think we adapt the same thing to our concept of Shabbos.
Meaning this other relationship with God.
And I think that every day should be Shabbos. Really think about it.
Well, it's funny that you say that. There is a teaching that says Shabbos is the seventh day of the week, and the goal is to bring a little bit of Shabbos into every day of the week. How that looks, I'm going to use a very simplistic way. It's like when you buy something on Tuesday for Shabbos or Wednesday for Shabbos, you've brought Shabbos into your weekday. And then, of course, there's the other way. From Shabbos, you took an inspiration into your weekday. That's for sure. I want to add to what you're saying, not even to go into like right, wrong, or not. I think the point is that if Shabbos is a day that we grow in our relationship with God, for everyone it's going to look differently, but as long as we're growing, right? And so that might mean, I'm just using a true example, that it might mean you sat for Kiddush with your family and you did nothing else. The rest of the day was very whatever you do, but you brought something in and you grow from there. That's, I think, the beautiful part of it. So like, coming back to, no rabbi is going to say, oh, do it anyways, even though you're not allowed. What you're going to do, you're going to do. How you explain it and how you teach it to your children is going to be more important, and most important within that. And even if you said, hey, this is probably wrong, but I need to do it, where you kind of have classified it. I doesn't mean God. I as in you, Jeffrey. So it doesn't kosher it, right? They're part of this is how you tell it to others. Like, this is not allowed, or this is totally allowed. It's going to be part of this discussion. What you do and how you grow within Judaism and how you celebrate Shabbos is most important. I think I've shared this many times, and I find it so important to remember. This relationship, the whole Jewish religion, is about what God wants with us, not from us only, but with us. And so if we forget the God part and we make it about the me part, what's Judaism? And so I kind of think it's always important to keep that in the way we think, regardless of what we do in the end. But it has to be the major part of the way we for you, it might, in this situation, might be like the way you deliberate what you're going to do in the end. That has to be the core. And that's why I always share this line that says, sometimes having empty candles or empty candlesticks or two candlesticks with two candles that are unlit is more meaningful than having two candlesticks that are lit. Because you came after Shabbos started, you wanted to light candles, but God said, don't make a fire after nightfall. But what do you mean? I gotta light candles. That's what I do. Well, who are you lighting the candles for? If you're lighting it for yourself, of course you're gonna light the candles. But if you're lighting the candles because God wants you to light Shabbos candles and have a relationship with God through these avenues, then those two empty candlesticks are so beautiful. Right? Of course you should come home earlier and light candles. But you came home and you can't. Having two empty candlesticks is beautiful. So it's all about how we frame it. But there's only one right way to frame it, and that is God is the center of it. And us together in the center of it with God, not me. And I learned these things traditionally and culturally and whatever else, but we took God out of the equation. So that's a very important thing for each of us to think about when we talk about these things. That doesn't mean we always come to the correct answer. I'm talking for myself as well. Sometimes we do something, it's like we forgot to add that part. It's like, how do you answer or how do you explain to your kids? It's kind of one of the things that I always think about. I have young kids who ask questions. And so, parents become much more cognizant of what they're doing when they have to explain it to their kids. Like, you tell your child, tell the ticket attendant you're 11 so that you don't have to pay the 12-year-old pricing. First of all, it's theft. But like, now your kids don't see that as a problem. And so maybe as a child, you did that, you went to somebody that said only 18 and older and you did 17 and you never thought about how other people look at it. But really, the reason why we should have made that decision to begin with was not because how other people are going to perceive it, but it was for us. We have to live with those and know what our relationship with ourselves, with God, with purpose. That's kind of what I always add to this. I think that's important.
However one feels about these things, the most important perception is to oneself. More than anybody.
Right. I don't know that that's always so easy for people. They don't always think about that. But you're right. I have to live with my decisions. I mean, some of the greatest ethical cases are literally, they hinge upon that line. It's like maybe within the law you can do that, but you have to live with that.
The character, what one does, what no one does.
Right. I love that line. But just after Rita, I'll share what I mean when I say like some of the great ethical dilemmas on that. Yeah.
Back on Jeff's question, which is after the murders in Pittsburgh, a lot of rabbis started turning on their cell phone on the bima on Shabbat.
Okay,
So talk about that.
yeah. So by the way, this comes back to one of the points that we talked about earlier. The first thing is something wrong or not? Having a cell phone on is not a problem ever. Using my cell phone, well, it depends why I'm using it. If I'm just using it, texting, surfing the internet, making random phone calls, problem. If I have it on because of safety and security, that it's instant that I can call 911, not a problem. So a lot of these things, some of the things that were implemented were never really an issue and people just didn't think about it. And some of them were an issue, but for safety and security. Like, let me ask you a question. Is a gun, before we touch any details, is a gun allowed to be held on Shabbos? As a gun. I come to your house, you have a collector's item. I'm like, wow, that is amazing. Let me see it. And I hold it. I'm just checking it out. I take the magazine out, I put it back in. I'm not shooting it.
Give you a specific example, I really am. I have a cousin who lives in Toronto. Over a 28-year period, smuggled 3,200 Jews out of Syria.
Wow.
She had two phones at home. One phone, everybody could the number. The other phone was only known by the Mossad and senior official in Israel. If her home phone rang on Shabbos, she would not answer. The other phone rang, she knew somebody's life was in imminent danger.
And she would answer. Right. So these are great examples where here you have two phones, but that's a great example. It's like life and death, you're always allowed to do. And so, by the way, a great question is like, if you're in the medical world, that becomes life and death. If you're in the police world, that's not life and death because there's probably somebody else who could do it too. And so unless it's on your front door, I mean, to work on Shabbos type of a thing, you know, the questions are different, but there's an important aspect here because I recently dealt with this. Some people make their own definitions of what life and death is. That's another conversation, right? The Torah tells us what's life and death. You just gave a good example. I'm going to give you another example like that. Can I do an autopsy in Judaism? The answer is no, on a general term, right? But what happens if the autopsy will save another person with the result I find right now? That's another question, right? What happens if the autopsy is going to only potentially maybe save somebody down the road? That's going to be a massive debate where most people say no. That's why I say your example is great. Because she knew that she didn't want to answer her other phone for a phone call by mistake, she had a separate cell phone just for them. And that's costs money to do that, but because her value system was Judaism and living within the law or the framework of what the Torah says is keep a life, save a life, etc. So that's a very important aspect. But the short story is that saving a life will change a lot of things. Holding a gun just for fun is something that's called muktzah. The word muktzah means set aside. If you grew up like in a Jewish family, oh, don't touch that, that's muktzah. Right? Like I heard a joke, a woman was in a store in Toronto actually, and sees a young black woman with her son, and the son wants something from the snacks. And she's, oh no, you can't have that, that's not kosher. This person is like so intrigued that this black woman is telling her son she can't have something because it's kosher. It's like, are you Jewish? Do you keep kosher? She's like, no, but I saw that works with all the Jewish kids. Yeah, so like the idea is that there are certain things that for security are always gonna be allowed, and other things that are not allowed because they were set aside. Our mindset for Shabbos was not for mundane things. A gun had no purpose on Shabbos, so it becomes set aside. I don't need it, and therefore you can't touch it on Shabbos. But the minute I need it, guns, I don't mean that gun, but in general, I could have a gun that I can carry on Shabbos because part of a safety team in my shul or whatever it is. And that's with a lot of things. That would be a pen. If you needed a pen for that safety thing, that would be with your cell phone. That would be with a radio. But I will be most honest that not every rabbi is going to see eye to eye on what's needed for safety and security. And they're also not going to see eye to eye on what is considered an elevated security threat or not. Where if it's an elevated security threat, everyone's going to say you can use all these items. And so today in the modern America, where we are afraid of lone wolves and other security threats, some rabbis are going to say, therefore, the safety team can use radios with checking in every hour, etc. And others are going to say, well, that's not an imminent threat in front of you. That's a threat. And guess what? Are they right or wrong? I mean, to be debated, nothing to do with Jewish rabbis. That's to be debated by security experts. And they're not going to see eye to eye. Like, if it was an imminent threat, you'd have a lot of people not show up to shul. Like, I'm not putting myself in that danger. If it's not an imminent threat, it's just an idea out there that we're aware of and we're keeping our eyes open for, you'll feel more comfortable in that setting. And so that's why I say, like, you are going to find rabbis that are not making their own answers. They're asking a security expert, and this guy says it's a problem. This guy says it's not. And I will use COVID as the exact example for that. You had so many doctors giving their own opinions. Now, I'm not going into the politics of this. Let's just talk about it before politics, like how dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have different doctors give different opinions. Or how dangerous is it now where we have different, I don't want to call them solutions, but different medical ways of treating now that we have so much more data So somebody who's older who might have been more vulnerable to the virus's effects on them, maybe now we're saying, you know what, it's not as bad. First of all, the virus isn't out there as bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like those are not for rabbis to answer. Those are for the doctors to answer and a rabbi to kind of work with one doctor. I mean, we probably saw everyone knows that we've seen different rabbis take different extremes. And he's like, who the heck does this rabbi think he is to talk about medical things? Well, you hope he had a doctor with him. If he didn't, then you're right. Who the heck does he think he is? I don't know how the churches work, but hopefully when churches were fighting in different states, they had real doctors, not political doctors, at least guiding them where they say, listen, if you don't feel comfortable coming, we totally understand. But this doctor says that in a public outdoor area, you'll be safer. I don't know how people's messaging work, but that's what you would hope. But that's the same thing. Like Judaism is very technical, but some things are beyond the Jewish technical side. They're take the expert side, then apply the Jewish law to it. And other things are the other way around, where it's a Jewish thing. So fasting on Yom Kippur, for example, a person says, oh, I can't fast anymore, I'm older. Well, I don't know that that's how Jewish law works. And just because your doctor said you shouldn't fast, did that doctor say you can't fast? Like these are questions that you have to work with your doctor. Make sure they understand Yom Kippur and what it means to you and what fasting would mean to you. Can you skip a day? Are they just saying that like just nonchalant, or do they really listen and try to understand what you're asking? But I know so many people who say, oh, I drink on Yom Kippur. We live in Arizona. I'm like, there are thousands of Jews in Phoenix that don't drink on Yom Kippur who live in Arizona. And they lived. So like, how do you decide what's right or wrong? So you want Judaism to inform the rabbi, right? Or the Jewish law to inform the doctor before that doctor just says, don't fast, you're older, you take a medicine. Like there are 500 people taking the same medicine who are fasting. So sometimes we're so quick to we know what answer we know what answer we want. And so we guide it. I will speak about a family member who for a couple of months didn't take a specific medicine. Then he had a flare up, ends up in the hospital. And the doctor's like, wait, why aren't you taking this medicine? That would have been great for you. And then when you look back at how his meeting went with the original doctor, he told the doctor that, I saw these and these side effects. So he said, don't take it. It's like, but if you would take it, you wouldn't be in the hospital right now. So are we informed? How are we talking as part of this? And it really comes back to the original conversation about recording on Shabbos. How are we phrasing the question is going to inform the rabbi. It's going to inform, meaning, and the rabbi might not know the full picture. It's also going to inform what type of an answer we want or don't like. And so really we have to come back to the text. Okay, let's really go back to ground zero. Let's understand why recording is an issue. Is it because of writing? Writing's a biblical prohibition. Is it because of the spirit? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will give you a good example where this plays out. You have an elderly person in your home. You're afraid of falling. Maybe it's your parents, whatever it is. And so you installed cameras in common areas. Can I look at those cameras on Shabbos? Totally different question. Of course you could, right? You're doing it for safety and health. But can you watch random, cameras? Different question.
Because there are 1,000 Jews in Phoenix who do not drink on Yom Kippur, and it's a very hot day. Doesn't make them right.
Well, hold on.
You're just quoting.
Meaning I'm using anecdotal numbers is kind of what you're saying, which I respect. Let's talk first of all globally. We don't have to talk about Arizona. I think to inform that, let's also understand the actual law. Like, I do want to back up for a second. Somebody who needs to take water in Jewish law is going to be allowed to take water. For example, someone who's diabetic is going to be allowed to eat. And the same God that wanted you to fast on Yom Kippur wants you to eat on Yom Kippur. That mindset you have to have. But what happens if you actually didn't have to drink because you drank enough before, you took care of the hydration part. And yes, towards the end of the holiday, you're going to be dehydrating, but no one said that you have to walk into 100-degree heat, right? So maybe the answer to that individual is stay home, where you don't get the chazan, you don't get the rabbi's sermon, you don't get any of that glitz of Yom Kippur, but you fasted. If you look at the Torah's law, the mitzvah is to fast. It doesn't say to pray. Fasting forgives. And so I use my wife as the example. She doesn't go to shul on Yom Kippur because she's a terrible faster, but she can fast if she's in bed. She won't be able to fast if she goes to shul. But she also, because she's a terrible faster, does drink. But here's where I go back to the law. She doesn't drink glasses like this, right? Jewish law has a definition of what is drinking, what is eating, how much volume. And so if you drink less than the volume, you're not considered drinking. And so unless she passes out, which thank God she doesn't, that's not the type of fasting she has, she can survive with these ounces every 8 minutes, for example, an ounce of water every 8 minutes. But others can't. And the minute you know that, the mitzvah for them is to eat. So like you said, it's very, I know we use like kind of, oh, you're giving me anecdotal data. It is very subjective. Each person is going to have a different experience, and you have to go with your experience. My fast is very different than someone else's fast. And my wife's terrible fast is very different than somebody I have a niece who doesn't fast. She'll be sick worse than my wife. And so her mitzvah is to eat. Right? She shouldn't be having chocolate though. That's kind of the way, it's not a day to enjoy. She's eating the bare minimum of what she needs to get through the day. Right? It's not a day of enjoying your food. There shouldn't be steaks and, But yeah, that's definitely, I think, to answer your question, really requires that we go back to the basics of why recording would be an issue to begin with. And it might be multifaceted. And then applying it to your question. Like, does that take away your question? Or does the question still remain? And then do we start applying this other thing that we just talked about, which is the spirit of the law? And the spirit of the law is going to be a little different. Like if they have security cameras anyways, let's rephrase your question. They anyways have security cameras. They delete every 14 days. Can I ask for that recording? That's a better question. Like that might get an answer of a yes quicker than the other way. It was never done for you. Right here, I commissioned the recording, so it's a little different question. I'm just throwing that out there as a curveball. I don't know the answer. Like the answer would be to ask your rabbi what you should do in your situation. But at least you have a knowledge of why it might be an issue and why it might not. And that's kind of how Jewish law informs. So I actually love, and one day I'm going to find a class like this, that it takes you to the question, right? You start the question, then you go back to the law from Torah law, Torah verse, to the rabbis applying it. Right? Because obviously if it's straight out of the Torah, we wouldn't have a question. But when you're taking 3 concepts and applying it to one item, that would be a beautiful thing to build. Some people hate that. I love that. Some of them, right? But I'm talking about where you go verse to end. I haven't found too many like that. I do know what you're talking about. So that's something I love. Actually, did you take the rabbinic responsa one?
Yeah.
That touches that. That does touch that. You are correct. I love that class. So the class that they did in January kind of touches that. People ask the question to a rabbi. A lot of rabbis publish their answers in books eventually. And so those letters a lot of times will bring you from the why, not just to tell you why that you can't do it or you can do it, but they go through the process of why they came to that conclusion. For me, that's fascinating. That's watching the living Torah. And others can't stand that because they say, oh, that's rabbi interpretation.
Yeah,
Well,
they put a lot of thought.
Of course.
into it, and
No, I know.
I don't know, they're not in the casual.
Correct. No, that's what you see. That's what you
see.
By the way, just to use a good example in legal law, some people read the Supreme Court arguments, or I should say, a verdict comes out of what to do, and you want to see what the dissent is. There's a lot of knowledge in there that's beyond. Sometimes I read, I'm like, man, I don't even know what this what are they talking about? But I would love to know. I just never studied the legal side of that so well. There's so much to learn there. Even if you say, you know what, you have so much knowledge in it, but you're wrong, right? Because that's what's going on. So I like that part. I think that's the fascinating part of it.
It's that same thing, but how do you handle someone who lives in Anchorage, Alaska, where in summer then it never sees?
By the way, I just watched a video this morning, the last sunrise of whatever city it was in Alaska. Did you see this video too? Right, for the next 100 and something days, they won't have this. And so they posted the video somewhere. I remember, I want to tell you, I once asked a rabbi this question. My father's like, you know, there's somebody traveling to Alaska. In the summer, he has a question about how to celebrate Shabbat. And so I went over to my rabbi then, in the school I was, and he's like, tell him not to travel there. That was his answer. I'm like, but the guy's going to be there. The people who live there have figured it out. Shabbos ends really late. It starts really late. And the real question is, what do you do for your kids? Like maybe as an adult, you can do Kiddush at midnight.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Because that's in their zone. I don't know, like the Jewish law, I don't know how that would work. I mean, you go by your location. So I know that why someone would do that, because it makes it that you can have a time that works. That's actually a time that you can have a dinner. But the real thing is it does pose a difficulty, but people have done this. It's not new.
Jewish and
Right.
Where are they from?
So what did they do? Do you know?
I think a lot of them were choosing either their hometown where they came from at the time, or Israel.
Right. This is a fascinating, that's a great, but they're davening every. So this is a real question, right? And by the way, somebody who is very like, I don't want to say God-fearing because everyone's God-fearing. Someone who is very meticulous about Jewish law might not choose that occupation or profession because of that. For real, they might end up in NASA's. They're scientists like that. They might end up in NASA's research program rather than on the moon program because of this question. They don't want to put themselves in that situation. This is a great question, though, right? And that's going to go back to who's your rabbi, who helps you make these decisions. As long as you made your decision informed, you're good. That's the goal.
It's not the fear of God, it's the awe of God.
Like that. You do know that it's true. In Judaism, it talks about two fears. One is fear, which is like what I call the lower fear, like I am afraid. And the other one is awe, like you said. And if you're at the awesome level, I'm happy. But it says every Jew can attain the awe level. Okay? We have to work on it. That comes from, wow, how great God is. Instead of fear that makes you hide under a table out of fear, you're in awe. And yes, it comes from meditation. It comes from thinking about how great God is, the blessings that you have in life. Just like love is an emotion that comes through that, the fear is the same. So Judaism talks about two loves and two fears. Entry level and, you worked on. That's Jewish mysticism. Kabbalah talks about that. Yeah, but that's 100% true. Any questions on the online side? Rick, Karen?
No.
All right. I'll end that recording then. Thank you for joining on there.